Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me for today's webinar where we're going to be talking about different types of annuity contracts and how to deal with annuities that are not Medicaid compliant. My name is Amber Hines and I am the owner of Ashford. We specialize in Medicaid compliant annuities as well as pre-planning policies with long-term care planning. If you have any questions on today's webinar, feel free to type those into the questions taskbar of the GoToWebinar dashboard, and you can find a copy of today's handouts in the handout section of the dashboard as well. So again, my name is Amber Hines, and I have been working with elder law and estate planning attorneys for the last 15 years to assist their clients with qualifying for Medicaid by using a Medicaid compliant contract. I am insurance licensed in all states, and I also hold my Series 65 license with FINRA. And like I said, I created Ashford to assist advisors as well as attorneys with pre-planning solutions for long-term care and crisis Medicaid planning solutions as well. I do only work with A-rated insurance carriers when I am looking for options for your clients. So that is something that usually does provide clients with peace of mind when we're looking at different carriers that we can use for the either pre-planning solution or a crisis planning solution. So today our webinar is focused on all different types of annuities. Many people think that annuities are confusing, and honestly, they can be. So with a lot of your clients that either are existing clients or are potential clients owning annuities, I thought that this would be a really informative webinar to talk about just the different types of annuities and how to best plan with an annuity if your client already has a contract or if they're considering purchasing an annuity and making sure that that will work for a Medicaid crisis plan down the road if they would need to qualify for Medicaid. So if we start out looking at the two basic types of annuity contracts, we have deferred annuities and immediate annuities. So when we look at the difference between the two types of contracts, a deferred annuity is where principal or a lump sum of cash is invested and it can be withdrawn or annuitized at a later date. Because a deferred annuity can be surrendered and it is a revocable contract, deferred annuities are always going to be considered an asset for Medicaid qualification purposes. Whereas if we look at an immediate annuity must be annuitized within a year of the client purchasing the contract, which means that it would pay out principal plus income over a certain period of time, either the client's full life expectancy or a term of years or months. And generally, the election to annuitize or convert the lump sum of an asset into an income stream and is an irrevocable election, and it cannot be undone. So we cannot trade a immediate annuity in for a deferred annuity because it's strictly an income stream once it is annuitized. Because an immediate annuity cannot be surrendered and it is irrevocable, there's many different ways that Medicaid may look at an immediate annuity contract, and it really depends on the language that exists in the existing contract, which is what we're going to be looking at today. It's important to note that with a deferred annuity and an immediate annuity, both of these contracts can be purchased with either pre-tax dollars, so money coming from an IRA or a 401k, as well as money that is post-tax dollars or a non-qualified annuity. So we're going to be talking more about what that means in today's webinar as well. I will add with an immediate annuity, the election to annuitize within a year of the client purchasing the contract. What that really means is that if I were to purchase an immediate annuity today on December 16th of 2020, the first payment from that immediate annuity must be made no later than December of 2021. So once we make that election to annuitize, it's strictly an income stream and is not a lump sum of cash anymore like we would be dealing with a deferred annuity. So we're going to start out talking first about deferred annuities. And like I said, a deferred annuity for Medicaid qualification purposes is always going to be considered an asset because it can be surrendered or withdrawn from the insurance company. So it's considered to be a revocable contract. There are several different types of deferred annuities. There's fixed, bonus, indexed, and variable contracts. And what this really means is how the money is going to grow, either based on a fixed interest rate or if the money is tied to the market at all. So depending on your client's comfort level with either being guaranteed a fixed rate of return or having that money tied to the market is going to really determine what type of deferred annuity they would be purchasing, whether it's a fixed rate of return or maybe an indexed or variable contract. For Medicaid qualification purposes, since a deferred annuity can be liquidated or surrendered to the insurance company that issued the contract, the policy is always going to be considered an asset. And so to deal with the annuity for Medicaid qualification purposes, clients have two different options. They can either surrender the annuity or they can exchange the annuity. If your client is looking at surrendering a deferred annuity, they would basically contact the insurance company that issued the contract and they would be requesting a liquidation of that contract. And when they request the liquidation, the owner is going to receive a lump sum of cash. So that's going to be based on the amount that was used to purchase the annuity and whether there's any surrender charges or early termination fees and how much the money has grown since they invested into the contract if they go to surrender the deferred annuity. So the amount of the settlement is going to depend on how long ago they purchased the contract, whether there's any surrender charge or early termination fee. And surrender charges can range anywhere from 15% down to 0%, depending on how recently the deferred annuity was purchased. Also, we're going to look at the taxability of the settlement amount. That is going to depend on whether the deferred annuity was purchased with pre-tax dollars, money from an IRA or retirement funds, or if it was post-tax dollars that was used to fund the deferred annuity. Here on the screen, you're seeing an example of a surrender charge situation. So as I mentioned, surrender charges or early termination fees for annuities can range anywhere from 15% down to 0%. Generally, when you look at a surrender schedule for an existing annuity that a client would have, it will depend on how recently they purchased that annuity. So if I purchase an annuity today and then I want to surrender that contract within the first year, if we're looking at this surrender schedule, I would be penalized 10% of what was put into the contract for taking the money back earlier than what would have been outlined in the contract. And so if we look at an example of a client that purchased a deferred annuity with $100,000 and they purchased the contract 2 years ago, we see that the surrender amount is still at 10%. So if I were to request, or this client were to request a full liquidation of the $100,000 that they put into this policy 2 years ago, instead of receiving the full $100,000 back, they're going to receive the $100,000 plus any interest that they earned, but less a 10% surrender charge. And so in this case, they would likely be receiving $90,000 after we take into consideration the $10,000 surrender charge. You can see that the surrender percentage is going to decrease as the time goes by on the contract. Most annuities are going to eliminate the surrender charge after a time frame of either 5, 7, 10, or 15 years. So if the same client were to request a liquidation 10 years after purchasing this deferred annuity, then they would receive the full $100,000 plus any interest that grew within the contract because the surrender charge after the 10-year time frame has been eliminated. I will also add that it's important to review existing deferred annuity contracts for clients because sometimes the policies will have a waiver of surrender charges if the client is considered to be terminally ill or if they are confined to a facility or have need assistance with activities of daily living. If that is the case and you're able to prove that the client has any of those health issues, then some insurance companies, depending on the contract and how long ago they were purchased, they will allow the client to waive that surrender charge. So it's definitely important to look at what language is existing in the deferred annuity to see if we can get away from any of these early surrender charges or early termination charges for clients. When we look at the taxability of cashing out existing annuity contract, this is really going to depend on whether the annuity was purchased with qualified funds or pre-tax dollars, or if the money that was used to purchase the annuity was post-tax or non-qualified funds. So from a tax standpoint, annuities can either be considered qualified annuities, which means that the contributions that were made into the annuity initially were pre-tax dollars. And so when the money is withdrawn or if it is annuitized, then all of that money is going to be considered taxable because the contributions were pre-tax funds. So when we look at a client that used an IRA or a 401k, a 403b to fund a qualified annuity, that money has never been taxed before. And so a qualified annuity is going to follow the same type of rules for IRS purposes as far as having early withdrawal penalties for withdrawals made before 59 and a half, and then also the requirement of a required minimum distribution when the owner of the annuity turns age 72. Whereas a non-qualified annuity is going to be a contract that was funded with after-tax dollars, and the growth in the earnings are going to be tax deferred. So this is going to be money that a client takes from a checking or a savings account, and they're using after-tax dollars to fund a non-qualified annuity. The principal from the non-qualified annuity is always going to be non-taxable, whereas the earnings or the growth is going to be taxable when that money is withdrawn or when the election to annuitize comes into place. There's no requirement on a non-qualified annuity to start taking distributions at age 72 like there would be with a qualified annuity, and there's not any early withdrawal penalties if the withdrawal is done before 59 and a half like you would have with a qualified annuity contract. Like I said, the taxability of the settlement amount is determined whether the contract was purchased with qualified money. So with qualified money, the account owner is going to, the full amount of the annuity is going to be considered taxable when the money is withdrawn or when it is annuitized, unless we were to roll that qualified annuity into another qualified plan through like a 60-day rollover or an IRA transfer. Whereas the funds from a non-qualified annuity, the principal is not going to be taxable, but the income or the deferred earnings and interest is going to be considered taxable income. On the screen here, you're seeing the taxability of a qualified annuity. So if we look at an example of a client that invested $50,000 into a pre-tax or a qualified contract, and then we assume that the contract has grown to $75,000, the earnings and the principal from the contract is going to be considered completely taxable because that money has never been taxed before. Whereas if we compare that to a non-qualified annuity where the same annuity owner were to invest $50,000 that was coming from after-tax funds, and that money has now grown to $75,000, the taxable portion is going to be $25,000, or the difference between the total growth and the initial principal into the contract, whereas the $50,000 that was used to purchase the policy initially is not going to be considered taxable when it's withdrawn or if we were to annuitize that contract. With deferred annuities being a lump sum of cash, deferred annuities can also be exchanged for other annuity policies. So the only option, or the second option, I should say, for a deferred annuity versus just surrendering the contract would be to exchange the annuity for another type of annuity. And sometimes we look at using a Medicaid compliant contract when we are doing an exchange of an existing deferred annuity that would be considered a lump sum of cash. When you have a deferred annuity that has significant growth, meaning it was purchased several years ago and it has grown tax deferred for several years, then the owner should consider doing a 1035 exchange of the existing deferred annuity. A 1035 tax-free exchange is a provision in the tax code that allows a policy owner to transfer funds from an existing annuity policy, life insurance, or an endowment contract to a new policy without having to pay taxes on the existing annuity contract. A 1035 exchange must occur between products that are like kind, such as if we have a client with an existing whole life insurance policy, they can exchange that for a new whole life insurance policy. A non-qualified annuity can be exchanged for another non-qualified annuity. And then finally, a whole life insurance policy can be exchanged for a non-qualified annuity contract. Under a 1035 exchange, the money has to be transferred directly from one custodian to a new custodian. So the policy owner, unlike when we're doing a 60-day indirect rollover with IRA dollars, cannot actually take receipt of the funds when we do a 1035 exchange. So the money must go directly from, if the money is with Allianz, for example, to John Hancock, that exchange must happen directly from one custodian to another without the policy holder actually receiving any of the money from the existing annuity contract. Also, when we're doing a 1035 exchange, we have to look at who the existing owner and annuitant of the contract is, because the owner and the annuitant must remain the same when we do a 1035 exchange. So for example, if we have a client that Joe Sample owns an existing deferred annuity, I can't do a 1035 exchange into a contract for his wife that would be owned by her, Jane, or I can't transfer the existing deferred annuity that would be owned by Joe into a joint contract with Joe and Jane as joint owners. It would have to be the same owner of the existing contract being exchanged for a new annuity that would also be owned only by Joe. There are some situations where if we're dealing with a husband and wife in a crisis Medicaid situation where we can change ownership of the existing annuity contract prior to initiating a 1035 exchange, so that the owner of the contract or the owner of the spouse that would purchase the Medicaid compliant contract would be the owner of the existing annuities, so that when we do the 1035 exchange, the owners are going to match one another and we get the tax benefit of doing the tax-free exchange for the client. When we look at whether a 1035 exchange is going to be worth it for a client, it's important to consider when the annuity was purchased, whether there are existing surrender charges, and how much deferred gain or interest has grown within the policy. If there are not a whole lot of gains or interests that have grown within the existing policy, it's likely going to be easiest for the client to simply request a surrender or a liquidation of the existing annuity contract versus doing the 1035 exchange. The one downside of a 1035 exchange can be the extra time that it takes to transfer an existing annuity into a Medicaid compliant contract. If we're considering doing a 1035 exchange for a client, it will likely be worth it if the existing contract has significant deferred interest or gains. So if we look at this example where a client purchased the existing annuity for $100,000 and it has now grown to $200,000, we're looking at $100,000 of taxable gain here. So it's going to make sense to do a 1035 exchange so that we can exchange the full $200,000 annuity for another type of contract where we're not taxed on the full $100,000 at one time. Instead, if we were to exchange this for a contract that complies with Medicaid, then the taxable amount is going to be spread out for whatever time frame we would choose for the new annuity contract. If you have a deferred annuity that does not have significant gains or deferred interest, then the client may simply consider surrendering the contract. So in this example, we have somebody that purchased the same $100,000 annuity and it's only grown to $105,000, whether that be because the client just purchased the annuity and there's surrender charges, or the annuity just hasn't performed very well. In a case like this, where there's only, say, $5,000 of deferred interest or gains, I would likely just be looking at doing a surrender of the existing contract versus doing the 1035 exchange, because the $100,000 that was used to purchase this contract would not be considered taxable when we withdraw the money from the existing annuity. Also, I'll mention that with a 1035 exchange, many people believe that if there are existing surrender charges on the current annuity, that by doing a 1035 exchange, you're going to avoid those surrender charges. But that doesn't actually happen unless there is a waiver of surrender charge in the existing annuity policy. So in this example, if the policy was just purchased within the last year or two and there's going to be a 10% surrender charge, then the client is actually going to be getting back less money than what they put into the contract. So it would make sense just to surrender that policy versus doing a 1035 exchange, because there's no real benefit to the exchange if we're not dealing with any deferred earnings on the existing policy. Now we're going to switch over to immediate annuity contracts. Immediate annuities are contracts that have already been annuitized and the client is scheduled to receive payment or income from the contract within 1 year of purchasing the policy. An immediate annuity, like I said, the payment is going to be irrevocable and it cannot be surrendered. Just like a deferred annuity, there's several different types of immediate annuity contracts. There can be fixed policies, lifetime variable, and etc. So with a immediate annuity policy, the payout is really going to be based on either the client's life expectancy, or it's going to be based on a fixed duration of time. An example of an immediate annuity payout would be a client that was purchasing an immediate annuity with $200,000 as the single premium or the purchase amount, and they invested that money for a time frame of 100 months, so that the monthly payout on the contract is going to be $2,100 for a 100-month period, meaning that the total payout, when you multiply the 100-month time frame by the monthly income of $2,100, the total payout is $210,000. We see that the total payout is slightly greater than the amount that is invested into the contract of the $200,000 that was used to purchase the policy, and this is just representing the interest that would be paid to the client on the policy over the 100-month time frame. But what's important to note here is that an immediate annuity, since it is strictly income to a client, this client could not go back to the insurance company after purchasing the policy and ask them for the $200,000 back. They're strictly entitled to the $2,100 for the 100-month time frame that they agreed to purchase this annuity for. So instead of the annuity being a lump sum of cash that we can actually work with from a Medicaid planning perspective, it's strictly going to be considered income because there is no surrender schedule or surrender value from the annuity policy. Since an immediate annuity is an irrevocable income stream, once it is annuitized, it can't be changed or altered. The income stream cannot be changed or altered. So this makes immediate annuities a lot more difficult to do Medicaid planning with than deferred annuities. Unlike a deferred annuity, an immediate annuity cannot be surrendered and it cannot be exchanged. We cannot do a 1035 exchange with an immediate annuity contract because it's strictly an income stream once that client has elected to annuitize the policy. It's important to note that not all immediate annuity contracts are going to be considered Medicaid compliant. When we look at what a Medicaid compliant annuity is, it is a type of immediate annuity contract that's used to convert an excess spend down amount into an income stream. So a Medicaid compliant annuity is always going to be considered an immediate annuity, but not all immediate annuities are going to be Medicaid compliant. As a result of the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, immediate annuities have to meet strict requirements in order for the contract to be considered compliant with the Medicaid planning rules. There are very few insurance companies that offer Medicaid compliant contracts. There's hundreds of insurance companies that offer immediate annuities, but there's less than 10 that offer Medicaid compliant contracts. The Deficit Reduction Act requires that an immediate annuity must meet all of the requirements that you're seeing on the screen here. So the annuity must be completely irrevocable, non-assignable, have equal payments with no deferred or balloon payments. It must be actuarially sound, and the state Medicaid agency must be listed as a remainder death beneficiary on the contract as well. What do each of these requirements really mean? There's a lot of misconceptions about or misunderstandings about what the irrevocable and non-assignable language means. It's confusing because the income stream from an immediate annuity is always going to be irrevocable, meaning that we can't change the payment amount or the term of the annuity once it is annuitized. However, in order for an immediate annuity to be completely irrevocable and meet the Medicaid criteria, every aspect of the contract must be irrevocable, not just the payment stream. So the completely irrevocable language means that we can't alter any aspect of the contract. We can't change the ownership, the annuitant, the payee, the beneficiaries, the payment amount, how often the payment occurs, or the duration of the payments. Also, the policy must be completely non-assignable, meaning that the policy owner cannot assign ownership to a company like JG Wentworth or Peachtree, companies that on the secondary annuity market that would normally purchase an immediate annuity for cash. The requirement that the annuity must make equal payments means that the payments must be equal without any balloon payments or deferral of the annuity payments. The balloon payment means that prior to the Deficit Reduction Act, we used to be able to do balloon style contracts where if a client purchased a $100,000 annuity and they did a 60-month time frame with a balloon, the balloon payment would pay them, or the contract over months 1 through 59 would pay them $10 a month, and then in month 60, when the balloon payment was due, the contract would pay them $100,000 plus some interest. And so it was really a way to backload an existing annuity so that we could defer when the contract owner received the balloon payment. But under the Deficit Reduction Act, we can no longer use balloon payments, at least in a non-qualified annuity context. The actuarially sound requirement means that the annuity owner must receive their original principal amount with interest within their Medicaid life expectancy. And this is going to be either based on the Social Security Administration tables, or some states do publish their own life expectancy table in your existing Medicaid manual. So just depending on the state, that's going to determine which life expectancy table can be used. So in all states other than 3, North Dakota, Oregon, and Washington, the annuity can be structured for a time frame that's shorter than the owner's full life expectancy, but we can't structure the annuity so that it's longer than the person's life expectancy. In the 3 states that I mentioned, North Dakota, Oregon, and Washington, these 3 states have more restrictive rules when it comes to the actuarially sound requirement. So we actually can't do very, very short-term annuity contracts in those 3 states. Looking at an example of an annuity that would be considered actuarially sound, if we assume that we have an annuity owner that is 75 years of age and has a remaining life expectancy of almost 13 years or 155 months, the annuity that you're seeing on the screen here would be structured over a 100-month time frame. And because this 100 months is less than the full life expectancy of 155 months based on this person being 75 years of age, we're seeing that the annuitant would receive the full $200,000 back with interest within her life expectancy. So this would be an annuity that would be considered to be actuarially sound because it pays back the full $200,000 plus interest within her life expectancy. Whereas if we look at an annuity that is not actuarially sound, we would be looking at any term that exceeds the 155-month time frame. So in this example, if we structured the annuity over a 200-month time frame, leaving the monthly payment at around $1,100 per month, we see that the 200 months is greater than the life expectancy of 155. So this would be an annuity contract that is not considered actuarially sound because the time frame is exceeding what her Medicaid life expectancy is. The final requirement of a Medicaid compliant contract is that the state Medicaid agency must be listed as a primary death beneficiary of the policy to the extent that they would provide Medicaid benefits on behalf of the Medicaid applicant or the institutionalized individual. There are a couple of exceptions to the state being listed as the primary beneficiary, and this can include if there is a community spouse or a minor or disabled child that would be able to be listed before the state Medicaid agency. So if there are any of these situations in your case where we have a community spouse that could be named or a minor or disabled child, those individuals can be named as primary beneficiary before we list the state Medicaid agency. Factors to take into consideration when we're looking at an existing immediate annuity contract that a client has already purchased to determine whether it will meet the Medicaid qualifying standards or if it will be considered an asset or a transfer for less than fair market value or an uncompensated transfer. There's several things that need to be considered, and one of the things would be when the annuity was purchased. If it was purchased before the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 took place in or was implemented in your state, or if it was post DRA, that's going to determine whether the annuity must have all of the language that we just talked about. So the purchase date or when the contract was annuitized is going to be an important date to look at when reviewing an existing immediate annuity that a client owns. Also, it's important to look at whether the immediate annuity was purchased with post-tax dollars or if it was purchased with IRA dollars. And finally, we also have to consider if the annuity is considered to be assignable. So can it be sold to a company like JG Wentworth or Peachtree on the secondary annuity market? The answer would be yes, that it can be sold if it is considered to be an assignable contract. So in that case, Medicaid may consider the immediate annuity to be an available asset if the policy can be sold. The Deficit Reduction Act outlined different rules for annuities that are purchased with retirement assets or IRA dollars versus annuities that are purchased with after-tax dollars. On your screen here, you're seeing text that is highlighted in gray, and this is the requirement that the state must be listed as a primary beneficiary on all immediate annuities that were purchased after the Deficit Reduction Act took place in your state. So this applies to immediate annuities that were purchased with both IRA dollars or pre-tax dollars, as well as annuities that are purchased with after-tax dollars. The state must be listed as a remainder beneficiary on all immediate annuities purchased after your state implemented the Deficit Reduction Act. The text that you're seeing in blue applies to strictly retirement annuities or annuities that were purchased from IRAs, 401ks, any type of pre-tax retirement account. And then finally, the text that you're seeing in orange applies to non-retirement Medicaid compliant annuities. So the requirements of the annuity to be completely irrevocable, non-assignable, actuarially sound, and to provide equal payments is going to apply to annuities that are purchased with after-tax dollars versus retirement funds. If a Medicaid compliant annuity is purchased with money in a retirement account, Usually in an IRA, the annuity must name the state Medicaid agency as the beneficiary. However, the Medicaid compliant annuity does not need to be actuarially sound, make equal payments, and it can include a balloon payment. An IRA Medicaid compliant annuity can be structured so that it's longer than the person's life expectancy, is not actuarially sound, and it can technically make a balloon payment at the end if we are dealing with an annuity that is purchased with IRA funds. However, the state would still need to be named as a remainder beneficiary on an IRA Medicaid compliant contract. Here you're seeing the requirements for a non-IRA Medicaid compliant annuity, and these are on the left-hand side, all of the requirements that we went through as far as irrevocable, non-assignable, equal payments, and actuarially sound. Whereas if we're dealing with an IRA Medicaid compliant annuity, there's the requirement to name the state as a remainder beneficiary, and it likely needs to be in payout status or annuitized so that it is considered income and it is not considered to be a resource or an asset for Medicaid qualification purposes. Also, the irrevocable and non-assignable language is really more from the standpoint of wanting to make sure that the annuity is not considered to be an available asset for Medicaid qualification purposes. What can you do if your client has an immediate annuity that does not meet the requirements of the Deficit Reduction Act? Because an immediate annuity does not have any cash surrender value and is simply a stream of payments, it cannot be surrendered or exchanged like we talked about with the deferred annuity. So the only options for the client to access cash from an immediate annuity is to sell the contract on the secondary annuity market to a company like J.G. Wentworth, or sell the contract to a family member if that family member is able to purchase the policy for cash. The process to sell an immediate annuity contract, we first have to look at the existing immediate annuity and determine if the policy is assignable. And if it is assignable and we can transfer ownership to a family member or to a company on the secondary annuity market, then we generally will receive a copy of the existing policy, send the contract out to companies that would value the existing annuity contract, and they would provide us with valuation letters. We usually receive 2 or 3 different valuation letters to determine what the fair market value would be of the existing policy, and then either a family member or one of the companies that valued the policy would actually buy the immediate annuity from the Medicaid applicant or their spouse in order to receive a lump sum of cash and get out of the existing immediate annuity policy. Once we receive the letters from companies like J.G. Wentworth or other companies on the secondary annuity market, that is going to determine what the fair market value would be for the immediate annuity. And at that point, the Medicaid applicant would sell that contract either to the company or to a family member for cash, and then we can do additional planning in order for that client to obtain Medicaid eligibility once they have a lump sum of cash from selling the immediate annuity policy. If you have clients that have existing annuities and you're not sure the different options that would be available to them, we can help with reviewing existing annuity contracts and providing your clients with options in order to best deal with those existing annuity contracts. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to type those into the questions tab. Looks like we have a couple here. Okay, so somebody said that they have a client who recently purchased an annuity with an IRA. It's an immediate qualified annuity. Not sure if it started paying out or if it's a Medicaid compliant contract. What do you recommend? If you have a copy of the existing contract, we can take a look at that and just see if it has already started making payments and the language that would be contained within the existing policy. And if it is IRA dollars that was used to purchase the contract, then in order for that to comply with Medicaid, is likely just going to have to be in payout status and also name the state as a beneficiary. But if you have a copy of that you could send to me, I can take a look at that and let you know what options would be available. We have another question here about, does your company purchase annuities? We don't actually purchase annuities from clients. We would be working with other companies such as Peachtree, JG Wentworth, or other companies on the secondary annuity market that would purchase the contract from a client. Somebody is asking, what's the easiest way to obtain a copy of a client's annuity contract? There's really two ways. If the client has a copy of the contract in their safe or that they have saved, then getting a copy directly from the client. Otherwise, usually contacting the existing annuity carrier and requesting that a copy is either sent directly to the client or faxed to the client is another way to obtain a copy of the existing contract that they would have. Okay, and then there's some other questions that I will reach out directly to individuals to answer because they are state specific. I want to thank everybody for joining me today for our last webinar of 2020. I hope everybody stays healthy and has a wonderful holiday season, and we will talk to you in 2021. Take care.